The crowd at Arlington was unusually restless that afternoon. A line of tourists stretched along the marble pathway, cameras raised, whispers blending with the sound of rustling flags. But at the center of it all stood one man, the tomb guard, motionless, rifle resting firmly against his shoulder, eyes fixed forward like stone carved from history itself. Then, the black SUV pulled up, doors opened with a heavy thud. A team of SWAT officers stepped out, their boots striking the ground in sharp rhythm. At the front was one officer, bulky vest strapped tight, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. He didn't walk like a tourist. He walked like someone looking to make a point. Whispers rippled through the line. Who is he? Why is SWAT here? No one knew, but everyone could feel the air tightening. The officer approached the mat, crossing the low chain barrier without hesitation. Several onlookers gasped, a barrier that countless veterans had never dared step over. He crossed like it was nothing. The guard's head turned slowly, his movement deliberate and razor. It was a tiny shift, but it sliced through the silence like a blade. The officer smirked. "What, you gonna stop me?" His voice carried, laced with arrogance. The guard didn't reply. He didn't flinch. His silence was louder than any threat. A woman in the crowd whispered, "He's not supposed to cross that line." A veteran near her clenched his jaw. Children pulled closer to their parents. Reporters raised their phones. Then came the command voice, deep, unwavering, trained. "It is requested that all visitors remain behind the chain at all times." The guard's voice echoed with a discipline that froze time. For a split second, the officer hesitated. Then his smirk widened. Or what? He reached to his belt and pulled out his taser. The sound of the device arming crack jolted the crowd. Someone screamed. A child started crying. The veteran stepped forward, but another bystander held him back. The officer raised the taser directly at the guard's chest. Cameras clicked. The yellow prongs pointed like a challenge at everything the guard represented, and still, the guard stood perfectly still. Unmoved, unshaken, his eyes locked forward. Posture immaculate, the embodiment of tradition meeting arrogance. The crowd thought he would step aside, but in the next moment, the world saw what honor truly means. Long before that tense afternoon, Private First Class Daniel Reeves had stood in a very different kind of silence, one filled with the sound of distant gunfire and the weight of loss. He had served overseas, in a dusty outpost where the horizon blurred into heat waves and danger could arrive without warning. Reeves wasn't the loudest in his unit, nor the strongest, but he was the one who never broke formation, even when chaos unfolded around him. One night, during a surprise ambush, his closest friend, Corporal Marcus Hale, was hit while pulling two injured soldiers to safety. Reeves dragged Hale back behind cover, but it was too late. Hale's last words were a whisper, "Don't let them forget." Those words burned into Reeves's memory like a brand. When his deployment ended, he didn't take the easy path home. He volunteered for the Tomb Guard selection process, known among soldiers as one of the most grueling, precise, and mentally demanding roles in the entire U.S. military. Candidates were expected to memorize hundreds of pages of history, perform drills with absolute perfection, and endure months of silent, rain-soaked, freezing night watches. Failure was common. Many quit, but Reeves didn't. Hale's words echoed with every step he took on the training mat. Eventually, he earned the Sentinel Badge, one of the rarest honors a soldier can wear. Standing guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier wasn't just a duty. It was a vow to every fallen comrade, known or unknown, that their sacrifice would never fade. On the other side of this story stood SWAT Officer Ryan Griggs. Unlike Reeves, Griggs's reputation came not from sacrifice but from controversy and ego. Once a promising law enforcement officer, he had made a name for himself in his city's SWAT team through aggressive tactics. But behind closed doors, he had multiple internal complaints, excessive force, insubordination, and using authority to intimidate civilians. Recently, he had been passed over for a major promotion after a high-profile disciplinary hearing. To his peers, he masked it with jokes. But to those who saw him alone, his bitterness festered like a wound. When he heard about a security demonstration near Arlington, Griggs saw an opportunity. He convinced a few colleagues to ride along under the pretense of security liaison. In truth, he wanted to prove a point, to show that his authority was untouchable, even in the face of military protocol. "This is just some guy marching around with a rifle," he told a fellow officer. "Let's see what happens if someone actually tests him." His colleague had replied uneasily, "Ryan, that's not a good idea. Those guards aren't just for show." Griggs waved him off. "Relax, it's all ceremony. Real power comes from action, not posing." The tomb of the unknown soldier has always carried symbolic weight far greater than the silent steps of the guards. For over a century, it has stood as a sacred place, honoring those who gave everything but whose names are lost to time. Presidents, foreign leaders, war veterans, and civilians alike have visited in solemn respect. The guards are trained to maintain absolute composure. Regardless of whether crowds or confrontation, they don't respond to insults. They don't engage in arguments. Their duty is unbroken vigilance. It is this very unshakable presence that gives the place its timeless power. Tourists whisper. Children go quiet. Veterans straighten their backs. In that place, the world slows down. That's why what happened that day struck such a deep chord. Griggs arrived with his team in a black SUV, stepping out with a swagger that clashed against the reverent air. He wasn't there to honor, he was there to test, to humiliate, to reclaim his bruised ego in front of an audience. Reeves, on the other hand, had been on duty since dawn. His uniform was immaculate, his shoes polished to mirror shine, his movements measured to the millisecond. He had repeated his exact 21-step routine hundreds of times, each one representing the 21-gun salute, the highest military honor. He didn't know who Griggs was. He didn't care. To him, everyone was equal before the tomb, whether tourist, politician, or officer. As Griggs crossed the chain barrier, Reeves's head turned with a precision drilled into him through months of training. His command voice wasn't just muscle memory, it was history speaking through him. But in the crowd, people began to sense this wasn't going to be a typical tourist misstep. There was something different about Griggs's posture. His hands hovered near his belt. His gaze was fixed, not with curiosity, but with challenge. Veterans shifted uneasily. Parents whispered to their kids to stay close. A few reporters, sensing tension, lifted their cameras. This was no accident. This was a collision between ego and discipline, about to unfold in one of the most sacred places in America, and neither man, Reeves nor Griggs, knew that within the next 60 seconds, this quiet confrontation would draw the attention of the highest ranks of the military. The first few seconds after Griggs crossed the barrier were met with stunned silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from indifference. It was the heavy, electric quiet that rolls through a crowd when everyone realizes they're witnessing something they probably shouldn't. Private First Class Reeves stood at the end of his 21-step walk, his rifle resting against his shoulder, chin tucked perfectly, posture immaculate. He pivoted sharply, boots clicking against the marble, and began his next 21 steps toward the mat's center. His mind was clear, disciplined, untouched by the disturbance at first. But as he reached his mark, his peripheral vision caught movement. A man in tactical gear, standing well inside the chain, hands resting casually near his belt. Reeves executed his precise head turn, eyes locking onto Griggs. The crowd felt the shift instantly. Mothers pulled their children closer. Veterans squared their shoulders, instinctively sensing a challenge. Reporters focused their lenses, whispers spreading like a current. He's inside the line. Is that SWAT? Oh no, this isn't going to end well. Reeves's command voice erupted, clear and unwavering. It is requested that all visitors remain behind the chain at all times. His words cut through the air, bouncing off stone and echoing like a warning bell. Griggs didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a half smirk forming under his sunglasses. What if I don't? He said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Several people gasped. A man wearing a veteran's cap muttered under his breath, disrespectful punk. Reeves didn't engage. He simply held his ground, returning to his ready position. His silence wasn't weakness, it was protocol, and more importantly, principle. Griggs took a deliberate step closer to the guard. The soft sound of his boot scraping against the stone made the tension spike like a live wire. He leaned in slightly, as if testing how far he could push. Say that again, Griggs taunted, almost daring the guard to break discipline. Reeves didn't flinch. His gaze remained forward, his breathing steady. Years of training told him, you don't engage with provocation, you maintain the post. The tomb comes first, always. But Griggs wasn't satisfied with silence. He started pacing around Reeves, circling like a wolf, testing its prey. His colleagues at the SUV shifted uncomfortably, exchanging worried glances. One of them murmured, Ryan, this isn't smart. Griggs waved him off without looking back. He was feeding off the crowd now, the attention, the cameras, the tension. What happens if I touch you, huh? He said. You gonna move then, statue boy? A child in the crowd whimpered. An elderly veteran clenched his fists, whispering, through gritted teeth, he doesn't know what he's messing with. Reeves held steady. He could feel the man's presence circling behind him now, the faint sound of fabric, the weight of eyes. But his mind returned to the words of Marcus Hale, "Don't let them forget." This wasn't about ego. This was about every name etched in marble, every soldier who never came home. Griggs stopped directly in front of Reeves again, invading his personal space. "Let me guess," he sneered. "You're not allowed to talk back. Can't move unless someone gives you permission, right? Must be real nice hiding behind a costume." The insult hit the crowd harder than it hit Reeves. A wave of angry murmurs swept through. Someone shouted, "Show some respect." Another yelled, "Step back, man." But Griggs didn't. He leaned closer, just inches from Reeves's face now. The guard's discipline was absolute. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His jaw remained locked, his eyes unbroken. Then Griggs took it one step further. He raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and snapped his fingers right in front of Reeves's face, as if trying to make him react. The crowd gasped collectively. A woman put her hand over her mouth. Cameras zoomed in. Reeves didn't respond. He continued to stand like granite. Griggs laughed, stepping back, unbelievable. "You're just a mannequin with a gun." His mockery emboldened him. He began talking louder, pacing in front of Reeves, projecting his voice to the crowd as if he were putting on a show. "This is what they call discipline, standing here pretending to be a robot while real men do the work." The reaction was immediate. Veterans shouted back. A group of tourists started booing him. The tension between the crowd and Griggs grew heavier with every word. But Reeves, he was the eye of the storm, still centered, unmoved. And then it escalated further. Griggs's hand went to his taser. The click of the safety release echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. People screamed, some backing away. A mother pulled her child behind her. A veteran barked, "You better think twice." Griggs raised the taser, pointing it directly at Reeves's chest, yellow prongs gleaming in the afternoon sun. For the first time, Reeves shifted his weight, not out of fear, but to bring his rifle to the ready position in one clean, practiced movement. His pivot was flawless, his barrel lowered in the traditional stance of the tomb guard, not aggressive, not retreating, just ready. The crowd went silent again. Even the wind seemed to stop. Reeves's voice rang out for the second time, deeper now, carrying the full weight of the U.S. Army's tradition. "It is requested that all visitors remain behind the chain." His tone was final. Not a plea, not a threat, a declaration. Griggs's smirk faltered for a moment, just a flicker, but then he squeezed the TASR's trigger halfway. Crackling arcs of electricity leaped between the prongs, a warning that this was no bluff. A veteran shouted, "Hey, that's enough." Another yelled, "Get security." Griggs barked back, "I am security." Reporters' cameras flashed, phones recorded. This moment was going viral before it even finished happening, and through it all Reeves stood like an unbreakable monument, the embodiment of a century's worth of sacrifice and honor. The conflict had fully ignited. What began as arrogance had become a dangerous standoff. A SWAT officer with a live taser, a tomb guard holding centuries of discipline, a crowd trapped between fear and outrage, and none of them knew that a convoy, less than a minute away, was racing toward the site carrying a man whose presence would change everything. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The taser crackled, the sound sharp and electric, echoing against the stone like a warning from a storm that hadn't struck yet. Private, first class. Reeves stared straight ahead. The yellow prongs pointed directly at his chest. He wasn't thinking about pain or danger. He was thinking about duty. He had stood through lightning storms, midnight blizzards, and the unbearable weight of grief. And through it all, he had never moved from his post. He wasn't about to now. Griggs's finger hovered over the trigger. The crowd held its collective breath. One more ounce of pressure, and the wires would fire. A child whispered, "Why isn't he running?" Her father replied softly, "Because he's a tomb guard." Griggs stepped closer, his boots scuffing against the marble. The distance between the taser and Reeves was now less than an arm's length. "Last chance, soldier boy," Griggs sneered. "Step aside." Reeves didn't move. His jaw locked, his eyes focused straight through Griggs, as if the man wasn't even there. His posture was a wall of discipline, built brick by brick through months of unbreakable routine. Then Griggs shoved him. The push was quick, sharp, deliberate. Gasps exploded from the crowd. A veteran shouted, "Hey, you can't do that." Reporters surged forward, cameras clicking furiously. Reeves's body absorbed the shove, boots skidding only half an inch before finding perfect grounding again. His rifle stayed steady. His hat didn't move. His eyes didn't flicker. That's when it happened. The guard's response. With a single, trained motion, Reeves stepped forward, crisp, controlled, deliberate. His left hand came up to secure the rifle, his right shifted to bring it into ready port arms. He did not strike, he did not yell. He simply moved into position, and in that single movement, every ounce of arrogance Griggs carried met the immovable force of tradition. The effect was instantaneous. The crowd went dead silent. Even Griggs, for a split second, flinched at the precision of the motion. The crackle of the taser cut through again, this time followed by the sharp pop of the trigger being fully pulled. 2 yellow wires shot forward, their tiny metal barbs aiming for Reeves's chest. But Reeves had anticipated it. His left foot pivoted sharply, his entire upper body shifting just enough to make the wires glance off his ceremonial jacket, embedding into the stone behind him with a snap. The sound was deafening in the silence. Sparks fizzled on the marble, a woman screamed, a child burst into tears. Veterans started moving toward the barrier, their instincts kicking in. Griggs, red-faced now, stepped back in surprise. He hadn't expected that. "You think you can dodge me?" he spat. Reeves didn't answer. He simply reset his stance, rifle back into position, posture like an iron statue that had refused to be moved by storm or man. That's when the first uniformed Arlington security personnel began rushing toward the scene from the far end of the plaza. Their radios crackled with urgency, their boots pounding against the stone. "Sir, step back from the guard," one of them yelled, approaching with hands raised. Griggs turned sharply, barking, "I'm SWAT. Stand down." The security officer didn't flinch. "This is a restricted ceremonial area. You need to step back now." But Griggs wasn't backing down. He raised his taser again, pointing it at the approaching guard officer this time. "Don't test me." For the first time, the crowd began chanting in anger, "Respect the guard. Get him out of there. Who does he think he is?" Phones were up everywhere. The moment was broadcast live on multiple platforms within seconds. Reeves stood still, watching, not reacting. He knew his duty wasn't to arrest, it was to stand the post, no matter what chaos erupted around him, and that's exactly what he did. Even as the situation spiraled, he remained the center of gravity. Then, in the distance, the sound of engines broke through the chaos. A convoy of black vehicles turned into the driveway, tires screeching lightly as they came to a halt. The security officers straightened instantly, recognizing the arrival before the crowd did. The back door of the lead SUV opened, and out stepped a 4-star general. His uniform was immaculate. His presence commanded instant silence, like a teacher walking into a rowdy classroom. Every soldier in sight, including Reeves, snapped to ceremonial attention. The general's eyes locked onto the scene ahead, a SWAT officer, taser drawn, wires scattered on the ground, a tomb guard, standing firm, unshaken, a crowd caught between outrage and awe. Without breaking stride, the general walked toward the confrontation. The crowd instinctively parted, forming a natural aisle. His boots struck the stone in measured rhythm, each step building pressure. Griggs saw him approaching. For the first time, his arrogance cracked. His grip on the taser loosened slightly. The general stopped just a few feet away. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command like a thunderclap. "Officer, put that weapon down." The entire plaza held its breath. Griggs hesitated. His eyes darted between the general and Reeves. For a man who lived off power plays, he had just met a higher authority, one he couldn't bluff. The turning point had arrived. Griggs had crossed the physical line, fired the taser, and tried to assert dominance. But in return, he was met with unshakable discipline, public outrage, and now the direct gaze of a 4-star general. The entire dynamic shifted in seconds. What had been Griggs's show of force became his reckoning. The tomb guard didn't have to fight. His stillness fought for him. His training had turned Griggs's aggression into his own undoing, and now, under the general's watchful eye, the next moment would decide how this confrontation would end. The 4-star general stopped in front of Griggs, boots planted firmly on the marble. His eyes, sharp as steel, pierced through the bravado. The crowd instinctively hushed, as if even a whisper might break the tension. "Officer Griggs, step back immediately," the general commanded. Every word carried the weight of decades of military authority. Griggs's fingers twitched on the taser. He opened his mouth to argue, but the general's gaze held him frozen in place. For the first time that day, his arrogance faltered. "Drop the weapon, now." The voice was calm, but the intention was lethal in its precision. Griggs's colleagues began to step forward hesitantly, trying to intervene, but the general held up a hand. His reputation alone stilled any resistance. Reeves, the tomb guard, remained perfectly still. His posture was flawless, his eyes unwavering. The general's gaze briefly met his, and in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement passed. "You have upheld the highest standard of honor. I see you." Griggs finally let out a short, harsh laugh, attempting to reclaim some control. "This is ridiculous. He's just standing there. It's a statue." The general's reply was surgical, each word landing like a hammer blow. "That statue represents hundreds of lives. You, sir, represent neither discipline nor respect. You are a hazard here." The crowd murmured approval. Some reporters whispered into cameras, realizing they were witnessing something historic. A SWAT officer, humiliated in front of a ceremonial guard and the nation's highest-ranking general. Griggs's face reddened. In a last-ditch attempt, he raised the taser once more. The general's hand snapped forward, pointing directly at him now. The word carried absolute authority. Every muscle in Griggs's body froze. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the taser. Sparks fizzled harmlessly on the marble. Security officers stepped in immediately, guiding Griggs and his team back behind the barrier. The crowd erupted into whispered applause. Veterans nodded to Reeves. Children stared wide. Phones continued to capture every frame. Reeves slowly pivoted back into his ceremonial stance. Not a word, not a motion beyond the exact sequence of his guard routine. The symbolism was stark. Discipline had survived chaos, unbroken. The general approached Reeves. He paused, standing at perfect attention, and gave a salute so precise it seemed carved from history. Reeves returned it, every movement steeped in respect. A child in the crowd, barely able to contain herself, whispered loudly enough for a nearby veteran to hear, "He's a hero." The veteran nodded. "Yes, he is, kid. Yes, he is." Griggs, escorted by security, kept glancing back. His ego shattered. He realized he had underestimated both the man in front of him and the weight of centuries of tradition. The taser, once a symbol of his supposed authority, now lay useless, a testament to arrogance meeting immovable principle. Meanwhile, reporters' phones captured every detail. The shove, the tasers, wires, the unyielding stance. The general's arrival, clips were already trending online, comments flooding in. Discipline greater than chaos. The tomb guard didn't even move. Incredible, this is the respect America should have for its soldiers. In that brief, electrified moment, Reeves became more than a guard. He became a symbol, a living embodiment of honor and composure. The general turned back to the crowd, voice projecting calmly yet firmly. "Let this be a lesson. Tradition is not weakness. Discipline is not passivity. And no one, regardless of rank or title, has the right to violate the sanctity of this sacred place." The crowd erupted into applause. Some standing, some wiping tears. Veterans saluted. Parents lifted children to see the guard, whose silence had spoken louder than any speech. Reeves allowed himself a single, imperceptible exhale. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, unnoticed by anyone but himself. He touched the dog tags beneath his uniform, recalling Marcus Hale's words from years ago, "Don't let them forget." Today, he hadn't. The general glanced briefly at the taser on the ground, then at Griggs being escorted away. His expression remained unreadable, but in that fleeting second, it said everything. Accountability had been served. Honor upheld. Reeves returned to the center of the map, resuming the silent, timeless vigil he had been trained for. The crowd fell into a hush once more, reverence restored. This moment, captured from multiple angles, would go viral around the world. Social media posts celebrated the tombguards.com, the general's authority, and the utter humiliation of unchecked arrogance. But for Reeves, it wasn't about fame. It was about duty fulfilled, about standing firm when it mattered most. And in the background, the child whispered again, barely audible, "Hero." The word lingered, echoing off the marble, a quiet acknowledgement of the power of stillness over chaos, discipline over disrespect, and honor over ego. The plaza slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy lingered. Cameras clicked intermittently, tourists whispered to each other, and veterans lingered, still impressed by the display of calm authority they had witnessed. Private First Class Daniel Reeves resumed his post, the familiar weight of his ceremonial rifle resting against his shoulder. His stance was perfect, each movement deliberate. The taser incident had passed, but the lesson of the day remained alive in his mind. He reached beneath his uniform and touched the dog tags that had never left him since the battlefield. Marcus Hale's memory flooded back. The ambush, the fallen friends, the whispered words that had guided him here. Don't let them forget. Reeves allowed himself a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Today he had honored that promise. The four-star general remained for a few moments, watching quietly from a respectful distance. Then he approached Reeves, stepping with measured precision, and gave a salute so immaculate it felt ceremonial in its own right. Reeves returned it with equal composure. The brief exchange spoke volumes. Words weren't needed to convey respect earned. A small child from the crowd, who had been watching the entire confrontation wide-eyed, tugged on her father's sleeve. "He's a hero," she whispered again. Her voice carried softly but clearly across the plaza. The father smiled, ruffling her hair. "Yes, sweetie. Sometimes, the quietest heroes make the loudest impact." Reeves allowed his eyes to drift briefly to the crowd. Tourists still snapped photos, veterans murmured approval, and reporters captured the perfect final shots of a guard whose discipline had outshined aggression. The moment was fleeting for everyone else, but for Reeves, it anchored him in the reason he stood there every day. Even the marble steps beneath him seemed to hum with history, the weight of countless soldiers standing vigil echoing through time. Today had been another addition to that legacy, a reminder that stillness can hold more power than force, that principle can outmatch arrogance, and that honor never requires a show of aggression to be absolute. The crowd slowly began to disperse, leaving behind the echo of their murmured awe. Reeves adjusted his gloves, inhaling the slightly crisp afternoon air, and focused on the small, symbolic details of his post, the precise angle of his rifle, the polished shine of his boots, the ritualized steps that spoke of unwavering tradition. In the back of his mind, the memory of Griggs and the taser would remain a reminder that chaos often appears suddenly, and that a calm, disciplined mind can turn potential disaster into a defining moment of honor. Reeves allowed himself a small gesture, touching the medal pinned over his heart, an emblem of his commitment and sacrifice. It wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about continuity, about standing for what was right when others sought to challenge the sacred balance of duty and respect. The general finally departed, leaving the plaza with an unmistakable aura of authority. His presence had restored order, but the impact remained, a clear message to anyone who might ever consider testing the boundaries of tradition. There are lines that cannot be crossed. Reeves turned his gaze to the horizon, where flags waved softly in the wind. The sun glinted off the marble surfaces, casting sharp, clean reflections. In that light, he seemed larger than life, not because of his size or strength, but because of the immovable integrity he carried in every precise step. The crowd, now scattered, left with a single lingering impression that true heroism doesn't yell for attention, and that discipline, composure, and respect are more powerful than weapons or bluster. As Reeves resumed the familiar rhythm of his steps, he whispered quietly to himself, "For them, for all of them." The words were soft, private, but they carried the weight of every sacrifice that had brought him here. Every soldier who had stood before him, every friend who hadn't returned, every lesson learned under fire, all of it anchored in this single moment. The plaza settled, the crowd dispersed, and yet the lesson lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Honor is unwavering, discipline is supreme, and some guardians are immovable, not because of force, but because of principle. The plaza slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but the memory of what had unfolded lingered like an echo through history. Cameras had captured every moment, phones recorded every second, yet the true lesson was not in the footage, but in the unwavering stance of a single soldier. Private First Class Daniel Reeves continued his ceremonial walk, boots striking the marble in precise rhythm. Every step was a tribute to discipline, honor, and those who had come before him. No taser, no arrogancia. No fleeting chaos could disrupt what centuries of tradition had taught him. Stillness is strength. The crowd had dispersed, but not without leaving behind whispers of awe. A child tugged on her father's sleeve, eyes wide. "He's a hero," she repeated, and in that simple statement lay the truth of the day. Heroism isn't always loud, and courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it stands silent and unmoving, teaching lessons far deeper than words could ever convey. The four-star general's presence had been brief but decisive, a reminder that authority tempered with wisdom commands respect, and that lines of discipline and honor must never be crossed. Reeves had proven that even in the face of immediate danger, principle could triumph over force, and respect could silence arrogance. As Reeves completed his routine, he glanced down at his dog tags and medal, a quiet nod to the past sacrifices that had shaped him. This wasn't just about a single confrontation, it was about continuing a legacy, honoring those who couldn't speak for themselves, and standing firm when the world tested the line between chaos and order. For anyone watching, the message was clear: tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. Honor endures when courage meets restraint. If this story inspired you, share it with others. Subscribe to witness more moments where discipline, integrity, and courage redefine heroism. Remember, the smallest gestures of principle can leave the largest impact on the world.